It might be a surprise for some people to learn that Chinese have actually been a major part of communities and society here in Aotearoa for about as long as Europeans have, certainly since the mid, even sort of early 1800s. And it's places like this here in Arrowtown that are largely the reason for that. If you ever visit the Arrowtown Cemetery, you might actually not be aware that there were a number of Chinese gold miners buried here. The Chinese were, you could say, invited to come and work the southern goldfields. They tended to have methods of extracting gold that were pretty usable in areas where the European counterparts had already gone through. So they tended to be given ground that wasn't really the best, but did pretty well with what they had. And large though they were subject to the kind of views that were prevalent at the time of this idea of the yellow pearl, the opiate addicted, devious Chinese people. Of course, remembering that was largely Europeans that got them addicted to the opiate in the first place. Lovely wee bird there. Silver eye, I think that is. And many of them came from places, or at the very least brought methods they'd learnt over in Melbourne in the goldfields and brought them to places like this here and around Otago. But yeah, life was pretty tough. They lived in some pretty funky dwellings, using what they could and what land was given to them, on usually marginalised, not very good bits of land. And in large, their burials were not much better. I mean, one thing is that they were considered as sojourn, that the idea was they would come, they would work here, and then eventually they would go back to China. But the New Zealand government, or I suppose probably more realistically the British government, imposed a poll tax on them, and it was somewhere, I'll find the right actual amount, but I think it was about £100 or something. It's just ridiculous at the time. They largely had no chance of ever being able to pay it, and without doing so they essentially were stuck here, so they couldn't go back to their families. And it was largely, young men, single, that came here to work. And when they did unfortunately die, a lot of the ones that were working in this area were actually buried in this ground right here. And if you look kind of closely, if I scan it, get that light out, you can sort of see the depressions where a burial has been made and in fact exhumed, and I'm actually accidentally walking over some even. It was pretty customary for the Chinese to, after death, be buried, their bones after a time exhumed and then shipped back to China. And unfortunately that didn't always happen. Some perhaps were left, but also there was a massive shipwreck where 199 individuals' bones were lost at sea. But they have, over the years, been collected and cared for by that local iwi. And at one point this would have had wooden grave markers that marked the location of the Chinese miners' burials, but it's thought that there was some suspicious circumstances where a fire was started, and at the time, I believe from memory, this was a bit overgrown, the grass not looking as tidy as it is today, and it all burnt down. So pretty much then all that's left are these little depressions in the ground. Pretty important and often overlooked part of Aotearoa's history.